Vanderbilt University, and I'm so excited to be moderating this panel today on assistant principals. It's especially exciting because it's National Assistant Principals Week, and this is the National Assistant Principals webinar. Each year, the American Federation of School Administrators, the National Association of Elementary School Principals, and the National Association of Secondary School Principals join together in the second week of April for a week-long celebration of assistant principals and their work to better their students. With the ongoing pandemic this year, the celebration has been moved to a more virtual format and includes this event leading through uncertainty, how assistant principals are navigating the COVID-19 pandemic. But perhaps most importantly, we want to celebrate all the amazing assistant principals, the work that they do for their school community, for their students, their parents, their teachers, and the other leaders in the schools. So welcome. We're really excited for this conversation today. We hope you can get involved with National AP Week through sending e-cards, hosting celebrations, social media outreach, or any other ways you can think about to celebrate and honor the assistant principals. And of course, you can visit the web pages of the AFSA, NAESP, and NASSP to learn more. We hope that you'll participate actively today. Please use the question and answer functions in the chat, and we look forward to a lively and robust conversation. I'm going to be moderating the panel. And as I said, my name is Ellen Goldring, and I'm a professor at Vanderbilt University. And I'd like to take a few minutes and ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves, also to provide a snapshot of their context and a profile of their schools, so we can really understand their roles and their work throughout the conversation today. So I'm going to start with Andrea Thompson. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Andrea Thompson. I am an assistant principal from the state of Maryland, specifically Prince George's County Public Schools. And in addition, I'm also a professor with the Kaiser University and several other universities. I am also one of the Maryland Outstanding Assistant Principal and a fellow for the Center for Women in Leadership.
Wonderful, welcome. And we know you're going to have so much wisdom, practice to share with us. So I know that I am looking forward to that. Next, I'd like to have Joseph Napolitano introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joseph Napolitano. I'm an AP at PS30 in Staten Island, New York. I'm actually an APE, which is an AP of everything. We do everything. I'm also a CSA executive board member, a CSA welfare fund trustee, with also a lot of other stuff. I also was an AP in a middle school, and I did start my career there for the first 14 years in middle school.
Wonderful, welcome. And our third panelist has the honor of being the 2020 National Assistant Principal of the Year. So congratulations on that amazing award. Deborah, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure, absolutely. And good afternoon, everyone. As Ellen had said, I'm Deborah Paradowski. Most people call me Deb. And I am, as she said, the National Assistant Principal for 2020. I currently serve as the Associate Principal of Heartland Arrowhead, which is predominantly a white school in a rural area. And we serve about 2,100 kids and on a campus-based area. So there's two buildings. In my building, I've got 9th and 10th graders, and then across the football field, we've got our 11th and 12th graders. So we have a very unique setup for our students to learn and such. I also serve on various committees through our OSA and state and national secondary for school principals committees. And I also work with our universities. So thank you. I'm looking forward to today.
Wonderful. So already we've learned how assistant principals, of course, provide so much leadership outside of their school buildings, of course, in their school buildings, but all of our panelists are very engaged in other important activities. So we're going to jump in and I'm going to moderate some questions, and we hope for a very lively conversation, and everyone should feel free to add to the conversation. So of course, as we said, the title of our panel today is Leading Through Uncertainty, How Assistant Principals Are Navigating the COVID-19 Pandemic. And I wanted to start out by just asking, how has this pandemic influenced your thinking on leadership? Of course, APs have such a pivotal role in their schools, and this has been a crisis. So rather than thinking about what you did today or yesterday, if you could step back and kind of reflect on lessons learned about leadership in times of crisis and difficult uncertainty. Why don't we start with Andrea, and then we'll just kind of do a little bit of a round robin.
Okay, well, for me, when it started in March 2020, was when I realized that I needed to switch into crisis leadership mode, because of course, transactional leadership would not work at that point. Transformational leadership challenged the whole change theories, because this was not a planned change, this was an unplanned change. So I know we had to go into crisis mode. We had to focus very heavily on cell, because teachers were experiencing colleagues dying. We also had to calm parents down, and it challenged those who had technology anxiety, because suddenly the school changed into an online learning environment. Major unplanned change.
Other thoughts from other panelists, please jump in.
I can jump in. Crisis always has a way of revealing, a means for us to, course correct things, recalibrate what leadership means to us. And it's been a year of reflection. As Andrea said, that, since March, we were thrown into this, and, there was no training that could have prepared us for this as assistant principals. So with that being said, our teachers dove right in and, became the heroes. They were the ones that were excelling in the classroom. Our roles as assistant principals, dramatically changed, because whether you were in school or online, our roles changed from the day-to-day management stuff to, being online, getting into those classrooms, supporting our teachers, our social and emotional piece, the well-being, and the things that we still don't know what our families have endured. So it has definitely, made me reflect on, how we're going to emerge forward, and recalibrate a lot what, leadership, looks like for us moving forward.
So that's a good segue, Joe. I wanted to ask you, I have heard from colleagues that in fact, the pandemic has exposed a lot of, we'll just say them, challenges or areas of need or weaker areas that can now be addressed because they've been so opened up for everybody to see, teachers, parents, community members, other leaders. Can you reflect on that or provide some examples? Is that the case? Do you think that's consistent with your experience?
Yes, I totally agree. As my colleague said, it did expose tons of areas where we were short-staffed and we found loopholes. Unfortunately, we had to go through the rings of fire. And by going through the rings of fire, it exposed a lot of areas that we needed to improve, which then gave us some data that we're able to reflect upon. Unfortunately, when the crisis first hit in 2019, we didn't really have time to reflect. So as it was emerging through 2020, we were still just going through the rings of fire, whether it was arrival and dismissal protocol, whether it was teaching platforms, whether it was social media, technology, support for the families, also our families that are low income and they didn't have access to a lot of the stuff that our regular population had. So by all these things emerging, it really did map out a new game plan. So like I said before, we are an AP of everything, but now we truly are an AP of everything. We are the physicians now doing the COVID testing. We are the attorneys doing the legal. We are the forensic accountants doing the financial. And we also are the data analysts reviewing all the data. So perfect segue, I was saying earlier, is for today's webinar. Today's day, I actually had a COVID test this morning. Then we went into dealing with the situation room with a couple of positive cases that were called in. And then we ended midday with a PPO from the superintendent. So it was a day like no other. And unfortunately, this has created the new norm. This is the new norm. And all these elements that became exposed where we needed to enhance our skills, it's actually a good thing because it's human nature not to like change. Nobody likes change. Everyone is comfortable in their comfort zone. However, change does expose areas that we could always enhance best practice. And I feel the positive side of this whole COVID event is that we truly went to the next level. Yes, it's a lot of work. Yes, we exposed a lot of weak areas, but now we have moved forward in such a quick manner that I feel in the end, we're doing a better service for our children and our community at this level.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on this question?
It's definitely caused a, massive reset, for all of us in leadership. And definitely it's a time for courage. It's a time for, your voice to be heard. And you're not just an assistant principal, as Joseph has mentioned, you are a leader. And this is where, your voice needs to be heard, and don't be shy. Don't shy away from stepping up and leading.
Andrea, final thought on this question.
Yes, I'm telling you, this pandemic shone a light on inequities. We saw families who did not have. We found out whether or not the school system was really attending to everyone's needs.
Yes.
And they had to get in gear with providing access to internet for all. And it just shifted the MTSS tier. That tier 1 became tier 3. We just had one big tier 3. So enrollment shifted because families had to move to start living with another group. People cannot pay their rent. The family and community engagement took a hit. Everything took a hit. But the one thing I'll say is that it showed how resilient we are as educators. We held it together. And I'm just so proud of everybody.
And I also was going to point out, it showed how key and central public schools are to their communities, because
Yes.
they held it together for everybody when other institutions couldn't, for very good reason, but the schools were there for their families.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to move on to our second question now. As we look ahead, so that was kind of looking back a little bit, but now we're going to look ahead to the 21-22 school year. And of course, schools are going to reopen, hopefully, in a little bit different way. What are some concerns you have or areas you specifically would like to address moving forward? Are there some supports that would be beneficial to you as you plan for next school year? So it's kind of two questions. What are you planning for next school year? What are some areas based on your experiences that you'd like to really now either build upon or augment or supplement? And what type of supports do schools need to do that work? Let's start with Joseph this time.
So what I'm going to mention is probably what 99% of the people are going to think about when you ask this question, and relating to social emotional learning, mental health, and which has created the new norms, like I mentioned earlier. So not only has our children and community already struggled with educational needs, now you add this on top of everything, it makes it even more difficult. So knowing that as a fundamental need, we need to address those before we can get even into the academics, because if they don't have the fundamental basic Maslow needs, we cannot move to the next level. In addition to that, it's the regular stuff where it's monetary, financial, staffing needs. Policy is also a big one. Consistency with policy. Throughout this pandemic, unfortunately, we've seen policy change every day like the weather. And then when we plan accordingly for the policy, they pull the carpet out, change the policy, and then we have to replan. So now we find ourselves in our team meetings making 5 or 6 plans, just trying to guess what we think central or the state is going to implement and try to be ahead of the curve. But we see as we're ahead of the curve, unfortunately, we're doing quadruple the work. And we can't really focus where we need to focus. So if we just had something streamlined, it will able to help the children academically and focus where we need to focus rather than the stuff that the policymakers should be handling.
So I'm going to push you. You're using the word policy, and there's policies about a lot of things. Can you provide an example or two? Which of the policies that are creating the most?
Sure. So
you know,
it could be like the 2-case mandate for COVID, whether it's classroom closure, school closure. Is it quarantining 10 days, 3 days? Are you 15 minutes with the kid on every other day on a different cohort? Are you doing it in the morning of, the morning before? So these policies keep changing. And unfortunately, that's the biggest struggle we have. So when we try to plan and get the kids into school, it's a huge obstacle that we can't really overcome, because as we try to do it, we'll get another email or another notification that the policy was changed. And then we have to undo everything we worked so hard. And because we're all virtual, I mean, we're here in the school, but because we have access to this new virtual world, we actually find ourselves working even harder. And I'm sure you guys will agree. I'm working like 24 hours a day. It's like nonstop. And I'm not complaining. I'm just saying I can't focus my energy where I should be focusing it, because I'm doing the work of 20 other people who can't get their stuff straight in order for us to be the professionals we are and focus on what we need to focus on. And that's very frustrating.
Very helpful.
Very frustrating.
Very helpful. Deborah, what are you coming down the pike?
Well, so we have been in school from the get-go 5 days with the option, which allowed for a virtual option for those that, chose to do that. So it was a choice, and or perhaps needed to make that decision based on being compromised. So Joseph, everything that you've said and more, we've experienced and we continue to experience, whether we were, and I do believe it was the right choice for us to be back in school wholeheartedly. But with all that being said, we are still experiencing the mental health and social emotional concerns, the staff well-being, what are we doing to model self-care? Every day I'm thinking, what can I do to demonstrate to our staff, self-care and how important that is, because if we are not at our best, we are not going to be at our best for our kids. And that has to happen. I keep thinking, the learning gaps, they're happening whether the kids are in school now with all the distractions, the being pulled out for contact tracing and all of that. So we are experiencing the same amount. And as we plan for that, we're already starting to look at, where we need to perhaps offer more sections at being a high school. How do we offer more sections so we don't have an overabundance of students in a classroom where we can't service them well anyway? So we are looking at adding more sections. We're looking at credit recovery courses, implementing strategies for the social emotional well-being. And, for those that have not been in school and are just starting to reopen, we've been there and we still continue to have those same strategies as the guidelines, the CDC guidelines still change. And the inequities still exist. We have, families out here that don't have those resources, and how were we able to get those resources to them to make the learning better for them? And that's still a struggle. I have homeless kids, and, we're trying to locate them. I've got kids that haven't been in school from day one, and they're not attending virtually. So I keep thinking, how am I going to rekindle that relationship and rebuild, what I lost this past year with them, so that I can put them in the best spot moving forward.
So Andrea, do you have any other, whoops.
Sorry, there was some background noise. Do you have any other ideas about moving forward and maybe some suggestions on addressing some of the challenges that you heard from your colleagues?
Yes, I believe as I look forward, there are implications for school budget. And we have to treat every school as though it's a community school, because we need to repair family and community. We've got to put structures and systems in place to support broken family, divided family, trauma-informed practices. We've got to pay attention to our teachers. We've got to pay attention to that cell critical practice tool where we focus on the adults, because we're asking teachers to support children who may have who may have lost parents and grandparents. Okay, so we're asking these broken teachers who may have lost family members to be supportive. What are we doing for them? What are we doing for ourselves as leaders? Because we're also strained.
So what are you doing for your teachers and leaders?
Well, I mean,
any tips?
Planning ahead. For example, I believe in healing circles. I believe in listening circles. I think that is something that needs to be put in place when teachers return to the building, that school administrators have these healing circles and give these adults a chance to talk about their experiences. They've got to get it out. Otherwise, it's going to come out some other way. So when I look at that, we look also at technology. We've got to ramp that up because a lot of Chromebooks were given out and so on and so. Those things have got to be replenished. We've got to go back and visit our tiered approaches that we were using. We've got to look to see that those who were maybe tier 1 are now tier 2. So we've got to revisit a lot of things that we did and not just go back in believing that it's business as usual. Everything has been affected.
That's very helpful. One other thing that I heard about moving forward, and I'd like you to either agree or confirm, is that there's going to be much more teacher turnover and vacancies, some early retirements. We've read about this in the popular press, teacher retirements, teachers leaving, teachers not wanting to return to work. Have you seen that in your districts? And do you think that's also a challenge moving forward? Who would like, Joe, go ahead.
Just want to say, absolutely, 100%. We've seen subs not showing up. We've seen teachers retiring. They come to us on a daily basis. And I have to say, in our school here, in our community, we're very supportive. And like Andrea said, it's very important to really support your teachers and your staff, because like she said, they're going through their own struggles. There's no one who's really not affected by this COVID situation. So we understand that, and we're very appreciative of everything they do for us and for the children. And we try to make them feel like, I don't know, we try to make them feel happy. We try to make them smile. We try to bring back what was lost. And that's a key element that I believe is gone. And unfortunately, people are only looking out of the rearview mirror when they're driving the car, and they're not looking from the front windshield. And they're only seeing the devastation and all the bad stuff that came from COVID, and they're getting scared. So most teachers are retiring early, losing a ton. Subs are not coming back. Subs are pulling themselves off the list, and people are scared. They just don't know what to expect. I believe that's the main thing. They don't have a clear picture of what's next. So they're too scared to turn the page in the book. So they're standing still where they are, and most people are just dropping off.
So how will you staff your schools next year? Any concerns in that regard? Andrea, is that an issue in your district?
I do believe there are people graduating from college who will be looking for jobs.
Okay.
That I do believe, I'm very hopeful. I'm a very optimistic person. So I always believe that, the older staff members are the ones who are likely to leave because they're able to retire. And we are going to have a lot of new people coming in. And then there are also people outside of teaching who lost their jobs, and they're looking to come into, use the alternate route to come in. So yes. I believe we'll be okay.
Okay, great. Deborah, any final thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think, it's definitely a struggle. And I have people in our building of all ages that are really concerned about what the fall is going to look like. And that is definitely going to impact and influence their decision on a return. For us, we were able, because we were back and we were flexible, and this is what I would like to see continue moving forward, is that we've been flexible with our staff to allow them teach from home while the students were still in their class. And then we were able to place another personnel in there just to supervise the classroom. So we were able to, it was a win-win situation. We were able to give the best to the students for the actual learning piece, but then we were also to supervise the classroom management by hiring somebody who needed a position. And so we were able to create jobs per se, and somehow I'd love to see that flexibility in some way move forward. I think it's a lot about, the respond, recover, and thrive. So, we're currently, we were back in March, we were responding quickly and adjusting and learning and adjusting, et cetera. And then it's, now we're in that recovering phase where, we're learning and hopefully going to emerge much stronger than what we were. And then it's going to be, let's thrive. Let's prepare for that next normal, and see where it's going to take us, because I would hate, for us to not learn from this experience to be able to move forward and provide better opportunities and experiences for our kids.
So one final question, are any of your districts thinking about continuing virtual school in the fall or allowing choices, assuming COVID doesn't dictate that because of what you've learned? Has this opened a new mode of instruction and teaching for students or teachers who might want that, even if COVID doesn't require it?
I'll jump in a little bit. Those are definitely discussions that are at the forefront at the table right now. We are currently in a synchronous learning environment, and it's a struggle. It's a struggle. We're losing out and missing opportunities, and the kids and the families that really need us, that have chosen to learn virtually, we're having a hard time connecting with them. So that has been tough for us. We also have asynchronous days, and those have been, a blessing for us, because twice a month we are able to use these days, and we continue online learning, but we are able to bring in struggling learners and also AP/honors students, to help expand upon the learning experiences. Our science teachers are able to reteach some of the labs. So there are opportunities out there that, again, in this world, we have quickly responded to and adapted to. And again, I think, moving forward, those are some great lessons that we have learned, and again, helpful to kids.
Wonderful.
Can I just jump in?
Sure, absolutely.
I agree with what Deborah said, and I think she hit the nail right on the head. This is the new norm for education. So, I mean, from the New York perspective, it seems like children will have an opportunity to go full remote or full in person, I guess, depending on the CDC guidelines and how many children we could have in the building based on the square footage and the facilities. But that is the new norm. And that's something that we are going to embrace, because from a positive outlook, it will enhance learning and engagement, because some students actually need that. They thrive. I mean, I have a couple of small classes, 12 to 1-to-1s. They're doing phenomenal. They're home. I mean, it's amazing how much they're thriving. So for them and for those specific children, it works for them. It might not work for others, but now you're pretty much giving a little buffet of how you could learn and pick the best environment that works for you. So, and we're not just using the cookie cutter approach, which I think is very important. So this is one positive outcome that I feel will help, teachers, students, will help the whole educational system.
Right. And I
That's
just would like
great.
to clarify. Oops,
Yes,
sorry,
go
Ellen.
ahead. No,
I
no,
just
go
would like
ahead.
to clarify a little bit, with the synchronous days and how tough it is for our teachers. I do agree, Joseph, that, this online learning venue, and format definitely has, kids have persevered in this environment, but it is not for all. And if we are going to continue with some type of virtual component, I would like to see that it is actually defined as a virtual option, not something that's synchronous.
Yes, agreed, 100%.
So this is a great segue to my next question. We know the pandemic has negatively impacted learning for practically all students, but we also know the pandemic has disproportionately affected the nation's underserved student populations. How will your school address the equity gaps and what has become known as the learning loss, especially those gaps that have widened over the past year? So we're hearing accelerated summer programs, we're hearing about one-on-one tutoring, but what specific plans are you thinking about now to help prepare all students for the fall? And I'm going to start with Andrea this time.
Well, I think a lot of things are still in the planning phase. One of the concerns I have is for children with IEPs, goals, and whether those goals were met or not, and to what extent could they have been met online, virtually. So I know that that has implications for special education teachers. I also think about English language learners and you know, what it is that, what adjustments need to be made for them. And in addition to those who may have been, who may have suffered trauma because of, you know, then I also think about the pre-K students who did not get a chance to get in those circles and all of that, and learn conflict resolution skills and all the ELA assessment stuff that they're supposed to have worked on. I think also of kindergarten children who did not have that full gamut of what kindergarten does to prepare them. So I believe that all these things will be taken into consideration. And I really do believe that a lot of children will return to school, especially in the Title I environment. Because right now, one of the reasons they're being kept at home is because a lot of the parents are not working. But I do believe as things open up, parents will be bringing them to school. So I do believe that in the fall, is going to be open.
Deborah, what is your district planning for addressing these gaps in the learning loss?
Great question. So we have some things in motion. You know, clearly the focus is on equity and always has been. But, you know, we find ourselves still trying to define, you know, equity in the world that we are in right now, as we are trying to honor it and, you know, exploit where we're falling behind and actually, you know, build up those resources. So the things that we're doing, exactly what you said, Ellen, you know, we are certainly looking at accelerated summer programs. We're adding extra sections, you know, to, you know, hopefully work with some of the increase in failures that we've had in our courses. We're looking at more credit recovery stuff, and we're certainly doing a lot of staff development. And, you know, whether it's reading books, you know, one of the most recent one that we've done is through Vernita Mayfield, which is the Cultural Competence Now. You know, we're reading articles together as you know, in our PLCs, and it's certainly something that we are educating ourselves and growing together. We have student groups. I run a student group. It's our multicultural student union group, and they have been instrumental in telling us what we're doing wrong and what we need to be doing. And I tell you, their voice has been heard and will continue to be heard under my leadership.
That's very exciting. Joe?
And I agree with Deborah and Andrea. We're doing the same concept. I mean, we're trying to dig down and see what our community really needs. That's why I would say understanding your community's needs and encourage them to voice their concerns are really the fundamental questions that we ask them, so we know the direction that we need to go in, because everyone's community is unique to their own school, and no two schools are alike and no two communities are alike. And we also are facilitating continuous communication and transparency and assessing those areas of needs. And we're really trying to bring back the humanistic approach to learning, which obviously need to be in person, but we feel that's lost in translation. I mean, right now we're on Hollywood Squares, right? We're all talking, we're looking at the boxes. I guess I'm dating myself, but the Hollywood Squares or the Brady Bunch, and it's not the same. I mean, we enjoy it, we like it, but it's missing the humanistic approach. I mean, especially the younger population. I'm a middle school guy and also elementary, and I see my young ones come in here and they need to socialize. They need to see other people. The ones that do come in, it's horrible, because besides having the mask on and they're coming in, and I tell them every morning, smile, I hope you're smiling under the mask. You could just see the face. They can't even process it, because I feel like there's, especially at the elementary school level, they're so young. This is all they know. This is their norm. They don't know any difference. Like Andrea said, pre-K, kindergarten, if they weren't in school and they started virtual, and then when they come back to school, they're already behind the 8 ball. So they need to catch up. And that whole cat and mouse game. It's going to be a big struggle for all us educators because we have a lot of work ahead of us. And I think it's just going to be a long road, but hopefully a short one, but it's going to be a long road.
So how can you support your teachers to, assuming that many or most students are back in the classroom, how can you support your teachers to address the differentiated learning that might be exacerbated because of the pandemic, giving the unique experiences that each student had over the past year? And when kids are in school, there's some common experience that every student has, even though, of course, learning is different for each individual student. And of course, their needs are very different and their communities are very different. But here, there's almost like a curtain, right? Because every student had such a different experience. As you said, some are online, some are not, some have experienced extreme trauma, some aren't. How can teachers be supported to address the wide array of student needs that they'll probably face in the fall? And I'm going to start with you, Andrea.
I believe that as principals look at their budget, I think that they need to put paraprofessionals in all pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade classes. They need an additional person in there. I believe that they also need to look at the special ed staffing and make sure that they get enough people in the special education department to really deal with these IEP goals that were not met. I also believe that they should think about extended learning programs need to begin very early, because usually they have extended learning program closer to like November. It needs to hit the road the minute we begin extended learning. Bring in the external community, because there are many programs. I used to bring programs in from the University of Maryland that would come in, and they would address a lot of the STEM type of things, and also they would address a lot of SEL. So, you know, when we take that systemic approach, a systemic approach needs to be taken to SEL, so that SEL is addressed all throughout the school.
Social emotional learning.
Yes, social emotional learning. It needs to be addressed all throughout the school. We need to also build parents' capacity to help their children learn to read and read to learn. All hands on deck. But it boils down to the budget. It boils down to the priority. And also, a lot of technology integration that is occurring needs to continue. It needs to continue. We don't need to just shut this down and call this pandemic crisis response. It needs to just continue.
Thanks. Other thoughts about supporting teachers in this new environment in the fall? Deborah?
I would love to just add and, you know, do a shout out to all the teachers out there that were thrown into this position.
Yes.
And you know, rose to the occasion, you know, and they were teaching from home. They had little ones at home that they were, you know, being
Yes.
teachers to as well. And the parents out there that were now learning our roles and teachers, and all the fun memes out there about, you know, the jokes about getting the kids back in school. And, you know, the shout out goes to them. I put a lot of trust in their work and honor the work that they put in regards to the differentiation that occurred back in March, because they had to adjust on the fly. They were learning on the fly. They were adapting their lessons on the fly to make it a quality lesson for our kids. And so kudos, shout out to them. I can't thank them enough.
Great. Joe, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I totally agree with Deborah and Andrea that we do need to give them shout outs. I mean, especially the substitute teachers. I mean, we know about the regular mainstream teachers, but the subs that came in, and this was that we had subs come in and it was their first day. And, you know, as a new sub, a young man or a woman coming into an elementary school, and then during COVID saying, oh, here's what you got to do and go through the rings of fire. I mean, we offered a lot of support as much as we can. We're always in the classrooms. We're always staying late, talking to them, whatever they need. It goes with the transparency and the communication. But they do need a shout out. And that's I totally agree with what they said. We can't shout out enough to them. They really went above and beyond to the 10th power, because without them, we wouldn't be able to run the school at all.
Great. So much to think about. So we're going to spend the last question before we open it up for discussion to change gears a little. Earlier on, you mentioned policy, and it's kind of getting in the way of some of the work that you want to do. But can you also think of some advice to policymakers to better support you as school leaders moving forward? So not only about COVID policies, but what in the policy community, and I'm just noticing in the chat, for example, there are some questions about teacher certification. That's certainly maybe a ripe area, but as school leaders, what types of policies or advice can the policy community begin to think about in terms of supporting you as school leaders and your schools moving forward? So that's a big question. It can be about anything, but doesn't have to be about COVID. Deborah, why don't we start with you this time?
All right, so loaded question. I've got a long list, but how about I settle for one?
You can have two, as many as you need. Go ahead.
Yeah, you said it earlier when it comes to the funding aspect and more flexibility with the program in regards to the limitations in regards to licensure, the categoric programming out there. I would like to see some of that being lifted because we're losing out on some quality educators that are maybe K-8 and need to teach that 9th grade science class for us. And we felt that a lot, in regards to when teachers had to be out or they were quarantined and trying to get the right person or the right fit in, and it was difficult. So I would like to see, I've learned that we were able to, as I said earlier, we were able to hire a teacher aide to be in the classroom, and have the teacher teach from home. I'd like to see that, being possibly a practice moving forward, if indeed there's an issue that warrants that. I don't think it would be for all, but I do think that it certainly, could keep our best teachers at bay if needed. Secondly, I think, the whole support for reopening schools, that is not going to change. That has to be part of, our process. What does that look like, and what does it look like for, as Joseph mentioned and Andrea mentioned, the equity piece of this, for the schools out there and getting this all involved, because we can't overlook that. And this process that we went through, this crisis, definitely exploited that for us, and we can't turn our back on it. We have to stand up, we have to address it, and we need everybody's voices, to be able to do that. Either they're reaching out to their state legislatures, and let's get our voices heard. We need to see some change.
Thank you. Andrea?
Well, what I would like to see is for policymakers to do what they need to do to get the schools funded and then get out of the way. These are the superintendents who took it on, and they did it and they held it together. So if there ever was a doubt about their resilience, their crisis leadership, I have to give a shout out to the superintendent of Prince George's County Public School. When I tell you she got that place going, centers set up everywhere for parents to be supported, for children to get access. All these superintendents need, just give them the funds they need. They know what to do. They took it on, they kept it going, they held it up, and they know exactly what to do to put it together. So fund the people and get out of the way.
That's very profound. Thank you. Joe, policy.
I totally agree with both Deborah and Andrea. I mean, they have to understand the ramifications of the policy. So when they make policy, they have to understand how it affects the school community. When you're sitting at the legislator's office and you're writing policy, you don't really see how it affects the community and the school. You just want to look at the data. And it's not always about the data. The data only tells you part of the story. It's what you do with the data and what's really behind the data, which drives instruction and planning goals. So unfortunately, the policymakers are not looking at the whole picture. They're only looking at partial of the picture, and then they're just passing the buck along and saying, you figure it out, but we're going to underfund your school and we're going to understaff your school, but don't worry about that because that's normal. And that's the frustrating part. So if they would make the policy, see how it's implemented in the schools, and then step back and let us take the leadership role that we all all are able to do and we're all great at, and implement it in the best way that fits our unique community, then we have more autonomy and we will be more successful. But that's just another obstacle that's in the way that restricts us from doing what we know is right. But we have limited power in that retrospect.
Great. Well, we have about 15 minutes left, and I'd like to turn to some of the questions that are in the chat. And then during the last minute, I'll come back and ask each one of you a final thought. So we have quite an active chat here going, and I'm just going to pick some questions as we go along. So one person asked, how did your district handle decision-making and communication efforts? Has messaging been consistent and uniform during this year? I have heard, I'm assuming that there's some thoughts behind this question, because I heard that was really a challenge for districts at the beginning, and getting a clear message and being clear on what families and parents and students should do. Who'd like to address messaging and communication? And also, you can talk about what you've learned, and has communication and messaging now going to be different? Or have there been some opportunities to change some processes that are actually bringing a good outcome that you learned from last year? Joe, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's a great question. So whoever wrote that in the chat, I commend you. It's sort of like we playing the phone game. When it comes from the top-down approach, they send a message out. We ask for clarification. The message gets distorted at every single level. And everyone puts a big gray area and never really answers the question that the school and the leaders are asking. And then they leave it for your interpretation. But then when you go back to them and say, well, this is what you said, they say, well, we didn't really say that. And that's very frustrating. And this is a huge issue that we've been experiencing since day one. The message has always been distorted, and everyone has a different message. And it's very frustrating. So if they could just streamline that process and people take ownership of the answers that they will provide, and God forbid they write it in an email, because no one wants to do that either, it's very frustrating. So if they were able to streamline that, then we would be more successful and know the direction we need to go.
Any thoughts about messaging and communication, and maybe how to do it better?
And I feel, just to chime in, Joseph, you nailed it. I agree with a lot of that, and how quick we had to change the communication and respond to what was handed down to us, through the CDC or our superintendent. Regardless of that, we had to act quickly. And if I have to reflect back and think about that, I would say too much communication is not enough. And, I feel like some of the struggles that we've had along this past year being in school every day was that we didn't communicate, or perhaps we didn't communicate clearly. And trust me, we communicated a lot, which maybe because it was through emails or Skylarts or however it was, our Facebook, Twitter, you name it, perhaps people just got tired of it, and maybe they stopped reading it and then still chose to do what they did until we would have to step in and say, but here's what we communicated. And so I would just have to say, looking back, that there has to be that direct pipeline of communication, and we can't avoid that.
So we're going to change gears. There's quite a few questions in the chat, really alluding to the beneficial side of online learning for some students. Some students really flourished during online learning. And of course, the teachers really honed their skills and their approaches on how best to use the virtual environment. So there's a dilemma here I'd like you to consider. If students are flourishing online on the one hand, but on the other hand, as all of you had said, right, there's so much missed in not being together in school. Social emotional learning, the first. Other skills are developed from having to deal with conflict and having to address multiple perspectives in a classroom in a different way, navigating the social emotional side of schooling. So how do you consider this dilemma if, in fact, some families and students can flourish online and they may choose to do so, and you as educators may think that there are some imperatives, right? Some real reasons that everyone should be in school, maybe some of the time. How are you thinking about that? And do you think those are decisions that should rest with individual schools, districts, or do we need policies about that as well? Now, that's a big question. I'm going to start with you, Andrea. This is just your opinion, because there's a lot of chats, comments about some of the positives, both what teachers have been able to accomplish, what they have learned, but also the benefit for some students.
Well, I know that for a fact, because I've seen it, where a lot of high school students have done well.
I have heard
online.
that.
Yes, the online students. And of course, you have to look at the developmental stages. And especially for those who are preparing to go to college, it's good that they're actually experiencing online because they will experience that at a higher education level. I do believe, however, that our younger children need to be in school. There's a lot that they need to experience, working together with peers, conflict resolution with peers, just a lot of social awareness. It can be done online too, but for those who have never been in school, I believe, especially pre-K kindergarten, they need to be back in school. But I do not believe that it should be a policy thing for anybody outside of the superintendent, coming into the school from the state level, telling the schools what to do. I do believe that every school district and its superintendent should have that agency. They know what it is that they're dealing with. Some school districts have more Title I schools than others.
Yes.
Some school districts are highly rural. And therefore, this is why I believe in flexibility, so that they make that decision.
Great. Joe, your thoughts?
I agree with Andrea. There's a lot of positives that did and is coming out of this situation. And like she said, it's not for everyone, and it shouldn't be a policy set forth by the state. It should be individualized by the superintendent or the district, and then trickle down to each school individually, because it all depends on the student's learning style. What type of learner are you? That's a huge thing. So it's not just your preference, it's how you learn. Someone's a visual learner, auditory learner, tactile learner. And also with the teachers, it gives them a lot of opportunity to change the way that their scope and their practice of teaching is. So it's not like we have to go in front of the class and teach ABC. We can go online. It depends how they feel comfortable and which type of learner that virtual learning will suit. And like I said, it's unique to each school and to each learner, and it would be very beneficial, and there's nothing wrong with it. That is a huge positive that's coming out of here. Everyone's role has changed dramatically. And it did change for a good reason. It's just now we have to foster the good and let go of the bad and move forward.
Great. I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to start with you, Deborah. One of the questions in the chat is asking about accountability. So are you having standardized tests this year? What are you being held accountable for? And are there any consequences, or how has that changed in your context?
So yes, as a high school administrator, we are actually planning for our Aspire testing, which will take place next week for our freshmen and sophomores. We already had our ACT testing for our juniors. So yeah, business as usual. That piece is there. We'll see how the results are. That'll come back to us, and we'll see how well we did. And unfortunately, that is not going to be indicative of who we are. It'll judge us, but it's not indicative of who we are. Those are just numbers to me. So I think about our kids and their growth and what they're getting out of this, and what we need to do moving forward. So that accountability piece, yeah. And we've heard it, we've read it, that would be something that I think we could probably do away with, as we said, Joseph, and perhaps there's other means of things that we can do that will promote education and what we do to service our kids in a better light than holding us accountable to these standardized tests.
Yeah, so on the one hand, we have this standardized testing and AP testing, and on the other hand, we have the deep emotional issues students will have in returning. So let's end on that note. Final question, Andrea and Joe, if you can address how do you envision handling the emotional issues with students returning in the fall? Some people in the chat have talked about extra psychologists and counselors. I know you talked about paraprofessionals. Is that the plan? Do you have the funding for that? Or are you doing extra PD this summer for teachers? What are some thoughts?
Well, I know a lot of things are still in the planning phase, which is why
Yes.
I keep stressing budget, 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 because
Yes.
we can have great ideas, but if there's no funding, it will not happen. So budget, budget, budget. We've got to bring in a lot of people who can use trauma-informed practices,
Yes.
restorative practices. A lot of that has got to take place. So it's all about the budget. And I'm still saying that all schools need to be treated the way community schools are treated. Give them the extra money so that they can leverage and bring in the community resources that are needed, because this is a pandemic, it's worldwide.
Mhm.
So there's no need to wonder if one school needs it more than the other. Everybody needs it.
It's a great point. Joe, final thought?
Sure, I agree 100% what Andrea said. I mean, financially, we need to be funded accordingly to put our plan into practice. And for sure, we definitely need more school psychologists, more guidance counselors, more social workers. We need more of the mental health to come back into the school and help these children and staff. I mean, everyone needs it. We're all going through this together. It doesn't signal anyone out. We're all going through this together. So also in regards to like the para management, we have para managers here in New York. So they just made some of the paras a manager position. However, their job or their role is limited to certain capacities. So they need to lift, again, policy, they need to lift that capacity, because when you gave us the para manager, that was a great idea. But then you had a little asterisk at the end that said you can only do this, this, and this. So if we were able to lift that, we could fully utilize that para manager to do a lot more in the school, as well as the school aides, and it all goes with financial. If they give us the monies to implement the plan into practice, then we could help our community as we see fit.
So a common theme that I've learned amongst many other, this was a great conversation, is flexibility and autonomy to let the professionals make the decisions and implement what is best for their communities.
Yeah.
And of course, in order to do that, having the resources to make those good decisions. And the pandemic certainly has maybe sharpened and focused some of your ideas on how to best serve your communities. And I know I, for one, not being in school right now as a K-12 educator, you know, my hat is off to you, assistant principals and teachers, but right now, being that we're celebrating assistant principals, just what an amazing group you are and how much you have accomplished under extraordinary circumstances. So I want to thank you for joining the panel. And I also want to say that the celebration of assistant principals is going to continue in just a little commercial that next week, the Wallace Foundation will be releasing a new report on the role of assistant principals, evidence and insights for advancing school leadership. It's a synthesis of research from the past 20 years with a new agenda for really shedding a spotlight on this very, very important role. And I think we've seen today just how important it is. So we look forward to the work continuing this week and next week with the celebrations. And we thank everybody for joining, and we thank the panelists, as well as all the wonderful comments and engagement in the chat. And I hope everyone has a wonderful, safe afternoon. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Brothers and sisters. Be
Yes.
well and keep up the great work.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Have a great week.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Be well. Stay
Thanks.
safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.